I had an unusual visitor on Christmas Day, 2008, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't Santa Claus passing my house in Bloomington, Indiana. The day started in typical fashion, with the opening of gifts around the Christmas tree. I served an early Christmas dinner for family and friends, and everybody had departed by 5 p.m. except my sister and brother-in-law who lived with me. They were sleeping in a bedroom at the end of the hall, with the door open. I went into my bedroom with my dog Toby and shut the door securely. Toby curled up on the foot of my bed like he always does. It was chilly, so I pulled the blankets and comforter up around my head and curled up to nap for about an hour. I was just dozing off when I heard the latch on my bedroom door open. I waited several seconds for my sister or brother-in-law to ask me whatever they came to say, but there was no other sound. It was almost 7 p.m., so my bedroom was pitch black. I had left lights on in the kitchen and the bathroom, and there were lots of Christmas lights in the living room, so the hallway should have been well lit. I would be able to see whoever was at the door just by lifting my head. I pushed the blankets down and lifted my head from the pillow, but just as I would have been able to see who was in the doorway, an extremely bright light hit me right in the eyes. I shielded my eyes and yelled, "Turn out that fucking light, you're blinding me!" The light immediately disappeared, and I heard the bedroom door latch close. My bedside lamp is a touch lamp, so I tapped on it and looked around the bedroom. There was no one in the bedroom except me and Toby. Toby jumped off of the bed and went to the door without showing any signs of alarm. At first I wasn't afraid because Toby is a Dutch Shepherd, well trained to be an excellent watchdog and proven personal protection dog. Since Toby was already up, I decided to go and let him outside and see what sis or brother-in-law needed. When I went into the hallway, I could see both of them still in their beds. I took Toby into the living room and let him outside. There was nobody out there either. So, who had opened my bedroom door and turned the spotlight on my face? Ordinarily, I'm not a skittish person, and strange noises or lights wouldn't alarm me, but this situation was just too eerie, and the light had made my skin crawl. Let me add that the latch on my bedroom door is broken in such a way that the inside door handle must be jiggled for the latch to pop out and engage. It makes a very distinctive sound that I'm used to listening for, because if it doesn't latch, the door swings open. I'm absolutely positive that the door was latched closed when I got into bed, just as I'm certain it was the door latch I heard during the incident. When I left the bedroom, the door latch was closed again. I couldn't understand how my sister or brother-in-law could have come into my room and then returned to their own bed and crawled under the covers in the few seconds that it took me to reach the hallway. But I figured it had to be one of them, since Toby always barks and growls at everybody and everything that he doesn't immediately recognize. When brother-in-law got up to get ready for work that night, I asked him what he wanted earlier in the evening when he had opened my door. He just looked puzzled and said, "I never got up, and I certainly never opened your door. I slept soundly the whole time I was in bed." Okay. I then asked sis, "Did you want something earlier this morning when you opened my door?" She looked puzzled and just said, "I dozed off and on, but I never got out of bed and I never saw or heard anything in the hallway." She leaves their bedroom door open at all times, and she faces the hallway so she can see whoever's coming and going throughout the house. So, who was my special Christmas visitor? And how did they get in and out so quickly? Like most people, the thoughts of loved ones are always close at hand during the holiday season. When I first went to lie down, I was thinking how happy I was that my small family enjoyed a pleasant Christmas. But it would have been so much better if my mother or brother had been alive to share it with us. I would like to think that it was my brother's spirit stopping by to say, "Merry Christmas, I still think of you too." I haven't been able to debunk this strange event or find any kind of rational explanation. I'm half afraid that my heart stopped during my sleep, and the light I saw was the bright light people report after a near-death experience. Leave it to me to see the stairway to heaven and ruin my chance at eternal paradise by saying, "Turn out that fucking light." I've made a mental note that if I ever see another bright light, to clean up my language just in case. It was Christmas time of 1995 or 96 at my aunt's house on a reservation in North Dakota. Some of my family was in the living room watching television, and the kids were playing in their rooms or sleeping. My uncle and aunt and I were sitting beside the table putting a puzzle together. My cousin, who worked at the casino, would come home around midnight or 1 a.m. This night, as she pulled up and was walking towards the house, she looked in the window and saw me sitting at the table. My uncle was sitting across from me, but someone was standing to the left of me and someone else was standing in the corner, so she continued to walk in the house and think nothing of it. She got in and said her hellos, put her stuff away, and came and joined us at the table. As we were sitting there talking, she looked at me and asked who was standing next to me a few minutes ago and who was in the corner. I told her that no one had been standing there, and she just said, "Yeah, there was definitely someone standing next to you. It looked like our mom and she was playing with your hair." I have long hair, which I used to wear down all the time. She said this person was running her hand on my hair like a mother does to a child. It kind of freaked me out, being I was probably only 12 or 13 at the time. My cousin swears up and down that someone was standing over me, rubbing my head and watching me put the puzzle together with my aunt and uncle, and then there was another person standing behind that person. We got around to thinking that it was probably her mom that she saw. She passed away on her birthday a week before Christmas back in '92. In my family, we consider our aunts and uncles to be just like our moms and dads. After thinking that it could have been her, it didn't scare me so much. However, we couldn't figure out who the person was that was standing in the corner. And always around Christmas time, something strange happens. But we just like to think it's her visiting us. My parents and I lived in a small home that was around 90 years old. It was in a small town called Bluffton in northeast Indiana. The year would have been 1996. We lived there from the time I was 7 years old to the time that I was 19. From the very day that we moved in, I felt like I was not alone. At night I would lie in bed with the intense feeling that I was being watched. One year around Christmas time, I was having a friend spend the night. The heat had just shut off briefly, and she and I were sitting in the living room watching television when the temperature dropped substantially. As I rose to turn up the heat, the Christmas tree began to shake violently. Ornaments were falling off right and left, and she and I were both terrified. We ran upstairs and laid down on my bed. My white cat curled up to us and my door was open slightly. When I gazed out at the dark hallway, I was horrified to see a tall white figure run down the hall. I turned to my friend, and she acknowledged that she had seen the exact same thing. She never spent the night over again. Years passed and things were uneventful. I became severely ill with a chronic illness and was frequently hospitalized. That's when the strange things began. After coming near death twice, I began to be able to sense things that no one else seemed to be able to. I once again felt that nagging sensation of being watched. I ignored it this time, and the illness went into remission. Once again, the activity, if you could call it that, stopped. When I was 18, I began to experience things like never before. Upon the death of my beloved grandfather, I had become preoccupied with death and frequently visited cemeteries. That's where I noticed an increase in the activity. It started out with voices. It was like a television had been turned on and there was a flurry of voices coming from downstairs, or even more frightening, outside my room. My parents were always asleep when this would happen, and their room was right next to mine with a vent, so I could hear my parents sleeping next door. I would get up and check all the rooms, but there was no TV on. Nothing to account for the voices. I was getting more and more scared as the voices started happening every night. That's when I started seeing shadow figures. They varied in size, but they were always human-shaped. Except for one. One night, I was walking out of my room with my cat in my arms, when she began to growl ferociously. I have to say, she never does this. She's normally an extremely docile cat, and I was shocked to see her acting in such a way. That's when I looked down the hall and saw a shadow the size of a large dog run down the hall at us. We don't own a dog. We had owned one before I became ill, but were forced to give it away due to the fact that we could no longer provide it with the proper care that it deserved. My cat growled and growled until the shadow finally disappeared. For all the other times that I saw shadow figures, they never took the form of a dog again. From that point on, the shadow figures were strictly human-shaped. Some tall, some child-sized, but they frightened me to death. I would lie in my bed at night, tortured by the fear that I was going insane because no one else was experiencing this. When I confessed my experiences to my parents, they took me to a psychiatrist who could find nothing wrong with me. I continued seeing the shadow figures up until the last few months that we lived there. As the months went on, I began feeling a dark aura spreading around the place. It was a heaviness, an uncomfortable feeling I could never quite shake. Sometimes I would get frustrated with whatever was there. I would leave a room and turn off the light, The light switch would make an audible click every time someone turned it on or off. Each time I would shut it off, the click would echo, and I would turn around and the light would be back on again. Finally, I had enough and said in an annoyed voice, "Quit playing games. Could you just shut the light off, please?" And sure enough, right before my eyes, the light shut off. One time I shut the light in my bedroom before I left the house, and when my parents came back home, my dad said to me, "What did I tell you about leaving your light on?" And I replied, shocked, "But I shut it off when I left." He had nothing to say about that. Another time I was lying in bed when I heard the audible noise of something sitting down on my desk chair. Sure enough, when I sat up, there was a visible imprint in the center of the chair where someone would have been sitting. Things would get so bad sometimes that I would be forced to sleep in my parents' bedroom like I was a child. In August 2008, we moved to a new house far away from the old one. I haven't experienced anything abnormal here, and the aura is much lighter. Perhaps it was my dabbling in the paranormal. I had often tried communicating with spirits and frequented cemeteries to try and provoke ghosts. Maybe that was what had caused all the grief in that house. But one night, I went back there to get some of my things. And as I was leaving, I saw a dark figure run across the yard. I drove away, and I never looked back. So this happened around Christmas time a few years ago. I had taken my 5-year-old niece to the mall to get her a picture taken with Santa. While we were in the line, I noticed a little old man and lady sitting on a bench watching the kids see Santa. The old man came up to us and told my niece that she looked very cute. I told him thank you and he went back to sit on the bench with his wife. We got the picture taken, and I've been waiting for a while for the picture to be printed. I asked the photographer why our picture hadn't been printed yet. He told me that my mother had already gotten the picture and pointed at a little old lady who had been watching us in line before. I went to the old man and, presumably, his wife, and told them to give me the picture back. The old man seemed embarrassed and told me that his wife grabbed our picture by accident and that she had meant to take their granddaughter's picture. He apologized, but I had this weird gut feeling that something was off about them. Next, I took my niece to the merry-go-round, and like magic, the old people were there too, still without any kids. The lady waved at my niece and smiled a big toothless smile at us. At this point, I decided it was best if we left the mall. I took my niece to get lunch at her favorite restaurant that's almost all the way across town from the mall. I felt much more relaxed as we had lunch, completely forgetting about those weird old people from before. As we were driving home, my niece spotted a playground that's close to a much different, smaller mall. She begged me to stop at the playground. There was a young man there with a little boy on the swing, so we weren't alone. Another car pulled into the parking lot shortly after we got there. We played for a little while, when I noticed that no one had gotten out of the car. I looked at the driver's side of the car, and sure enough, it was the same old people. They had followed us from the mall, to the restaurant, and then back to this playground. The man was staring straight at me and my niece, like he was hunting us. I noticed that he had his arm down and was moving it up and down, and then it clicked. He was masturbating in his car. I didn't want to scare my niece, so I subtly alerted the young man who was also at the park. I got my niece into the car quickly and drove into this mall's parking lot to call the cops and the mall security. I didn't want to stick around long enough for my niece to see this man getting arrested, so I gave the cops my number and left to my dad's work, where I figured we would be safe in case the old people followed us again. The cops called back a few hours later and told me that by the time they'd gotten there, the couple was gone, but they were looking for the description of the car that I gave them. It makes me physically sick every time I think about the fact that these old people are out and about and seem totally harmless when they're actually pervert sex offenders, or even worse, kidnappers. So, this occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me and change my views on allowing my kids to ever have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas, and my parents had got me my own personal phone, with my own separate phone line, because that was the cool thing back then, before cell phones were big. I had given my friends the number because who wouldn't, right? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m., and I had been sleeping when my phone suddenly begins to ring. I thought, that's odd, who can be calling this early? We all have to be up for school in the morning. So, I answered it, but all that I could hear was breathing on the other end. I just laughed it off as someone just messing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. This time, I answered it and said, "Who is this?" Nothing. Just breathing again. At this point, I was beginning to get irritated. I told them to stop calling me, and then I hung up. I laid down again for about 30 minutes when my phone rang for yet the third time that morning. I was mad, so I answered and said, "This isn't funny. I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning. Stop calling me." This time there was a reply. It was a man's voice. It sounded very gravelly, and he laughed and said,
"I can see you. You're very pretty. Why don't you come out and play in the snow with me?"
With that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom, telling her what had happened, and she woke up my dad and made me tell him everything. They both get up, and my dad goes into my room and checks the windows and everything. He makes sure all the locks on the doors are locked, and proceeds to tell me it's just someone playing a sick joke, and that everything will be fine, and he tells me to just unplug my phone from the outlet. So I finally go back to sleep, until my mom wakes me up for school. I get up and start getting ready, and I open my blinds to my window that leads to the backyard. I notice on this very frosty morning that there are handprints all over my window. I called my parents and they're totally freaked out, and my dad immediately called the police. The police came out to take a report and look at the evidence, and they decided they went to go to the backyard. Sure enough, there were a set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house, through the back of my window, back to the door, and back to the front door. The police think the guy had tried to get into the house.